the Police and Fire Retirement Board meeting. Call to order the Police and Fire Retirement Board meeting. We will begin with roll call, but I want to address one issue that is repeatedly coming up from city staff. There is a tendency, especially when our consultants are sitting at that table, to turn your head and speak like this, to which they cannot hear at Civic Center. So please remember to speak directly into the mic so they can hear you. Okay, we'll do roll call. Sunita?
Present.
Andrew?
Here.
David Kwan?
Here.
Howard?
Present.
Esmar?
Here.
Dick?
Yes.
And David Wilson.
Here.
Okay. We have no orders of the day and nothing to waive in sunshine. So our first business will be closed session.
Recording stopped.
get started with the recording.
Recording in
I think we have a
progress.
quorum. I don't know, maybe on a bathroom break. We do have one reportable item from closed session, and I'll turn that over to Maytac.
Thank you, Chair Votto. So for item 1B, the reportable action is that the board has authorized labor negotiator Trustee Menon to have the authority to negotiate the CIO's contract to up to 2.5% as a merit-based increase in 5 executive days. There are no reportable action on the remaining closed session items.
Thank you. Okay, we just, if there's nothing to pull from the consent calendar, then I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent.
We have a motion from Dave Wilson, second from Dick. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. We will turn it over to Prabhu for investments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, trustees. So today we're going to discuss the fee report, and this is something that we do annually, and the fee report then it first gets presented to both boards and then gets presented to the city council. I believe we are on the council's calendar for November 19th. 5th, okay, 5th. That's even better, election day. So before I turn this over to Harrison and Dinesh, I did want to share some performance numbers. So fiscal year to date, the pension plan is up 3.81% and healthcare is up 5.25%. This is as of 2 days ago. Also, I wanted to share at the last board meeting, Laura shared fiscal 2024 results. But I have some dollar numbers which Harrison has pulled out, which I want to share with the board. I think it's important because it's not to say that we have done such a great job as an investment team, so please don't take it that way. But I do want our stakeholders to know the amount of value that we all have added. And this is obviously a team effort. It's trustees, it's consultants, it's staff. But I still, for the record, want to share those numbers. So I joined the plan in March of 2018. And the first full quarter was June 30th, 2018. At the end of that quarter, on a 1, 3, 5, and 10-year basis, we were in the bottom 1% of our peers, excuse me, nationally. So I want that to sink in. We were in the bottom 1% of our peers nationally, right? And as of June 30th, 2024, we are in the top 27% on a 5-year basis. And the 5-year number is important because it's a full market cycle. So as of June 30th, 2018, the market value of assets for the pension plan was $3,523,000,000. I'll just round up and leave it there. So $3.5 billion. And in the last 6 years, we've added $1,981,000,000 in investment gains. So we've added almost $2 billion in investment gains. We have paid out $416 million in benefits over and above the sponsor's contribution. So that's a net outflow for the plan, which gave us an ending market value as of June 30th, 2024 of $5,088,000,000. So again, we started at $3.5 billion. We added $1,981,000,000 in investment gains, paid out $416 million in benefits, and ended at $5,088,000,000. And the healthcare trust has added it's a much smaller plan. Over that same period, it's added investment gains of $89 million. So together, our investment gains are almost $2.5 billion. So that's something significant. I want our stakeholders to know we have created some magic. Some magic has been created by this team, by ORS. And the 1-year number is less important, but still, I'll brag about it because I don't often get to brag about this. In the last 1 year, fiscal year, we did better than CalPERS, which is very well resourced. We did better than CalSTRS, which is again very well resourced. We did better than the superb San Francisco Employees Retirement System, which is very well resourced and very good team there. We did better than Samsara, the San Mateo County, and we did better than the Contra Costa County. So we beat all of our local peers on a one-year basis. So anyway, thank you for indulging me. I wanted to make sure that on the record we've stated. I shared similar numbers with your sister plan, the Federated City Employees Retirement System. We've had a similar turnaround there. Those returns are slightly better from a percentile point of view only because we take a little bit more risk in that plan. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to be the first to thank you and your investment team for doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, not only as a trustee, but as a plan member and a future retiree here shortly. Drawing from the plan, thank you. It means a lot that you guys really think that much of our members and are able to grow this fund so they can enjoy retirement.
Thank you both for those kind comments. Obviously, this could not have
If I
been
could
done
add,
without your support.
Prabhu, so, as a chair of the IC, I've worked with Prabhu and the team. They do a fantastic job. The stability has been great. The performance, as you said, is great. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that. And thank you for all your support on that. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Dinesh and Harrison. Harrison, as you all know, is a rising star within ORS. And this is his first presentation outside of graduate school. So please be kind to him.
Good morning, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, so the presentation we have before you is the calendar year 2023 comprehensive fee report. This is something that the San Jose plans have been doing since 2015, so this is our 9th iteration of the report. It's something that's unique because only a handful of public pension plans go to the level of detail of getting the underlying fee information of all of their funds and aggregating it together to produce this level of reporting. Usually in the industry, fees are underreported, such as on the financial statements reported by public pensions through their ACFR financial reports, because those only show fees that are invoiced, so the most transparent level of fees. Most of the fees are reduced from the values of underlying funds. So the returns that we show you all on a quarterly basis are net. They've already been reduced by those fees. But the purpose of this report is to try to show you what those fees actually are. And today we have 2 reports. There's a long form version of the report that goes into the detail of underlying asset classes, fund types. We don't plan to present that today, but if there's any questions, we're happy to answer any. We also have this report, which is a summary at a high level showing for the calendar year 2023 period, what were our fees, both in dollar terms as well as the fee ratio. And since we have 9 years of fee data, we can show you a trend of how those fees have changed over time. And to make the presentation, Harrison is going to be presenting. So just a quick introduction about Harrison. So he joined us about 1.5 years ago from Cal Poly, so right out of school. He finished his undergrad in economics with a concentration in finance, as well as a master's in business analytics. So Harrison, go ahead.
Yeah, hello everyone. As Dinesh mentioned, I'm Harrison, and thanks for the introduction. We'll start the overview of our fee analysis for calendar year 2023. To start, we should understand the total expense ratio and what it encompasses. We have our net returns at the top of the page, which are represented by gross returns, net of management fees, incentive fees, and operating expenses. The types of fees are as follows. The management fees are fees paid to our investment managers. Incentive fees are tied to the performance of a fund. And operating expenses are administrative costs of running the fund. And other expenses show us the costs incurred at the plan level, such as staff salaries, consultants, et cetera. In terms of our data collection process, as Dinesh alluded to, we started by sending out fee templates to public managers and an ILPA template to private managers. And then we scrubbed and cleaned the data, looked for outliers, and gathered fees for underlying funds, and cross-referenced old fee reports. We aggregated all together and produced this digestible report to show the data at a plan level. Here we have our 2023 calendar year fees and expenses comprehensively broken out into fund type, passive, active, hedged, and private fund strategies. Our management incentive fees along with operating expenses for the plan totaled $45.4 million, which you can see in that middle column in the yellow bar, and accounted for 97 basis points of the plan. And that's in the bottom right yellow bar. Below, we can see that at the plan level, we had $3.2 million in other costs, representing about 7 basis points in expenses for the total plan. And here we have the same graphic, but for the healthcare trust, which totaled $500,000 in management fees, incentive fees, and operating expenses comprehensively, accounting for only 17 basis points of the trust. And this number is considerably lower due to the fund primarily investing in passive funds with an 86.3% weight in passive fund strategies. In the table below that, other costs for the healthcare trust totaled $0.2 million for the trust and 7 basis points of expenses for the plan in total. So here we have the total expense ratio over the last 5 years, broken out into management fees in blue, incentive fees in beige, and operating expenses in brown. Below that, each year has its respective plan net return below. And comparing 2023 to 2022, the plan expense ratio increased from 79 basis points to 97 basis points, entirely due to an increase in incentive fees, going from 3 basis points in 2022 to 22 basis points in 2023. And this is primarily due to the plan returning negative 9% in 2022 and 9.7% in 2023. It is also important to note that our management fees actually decreased from 58 basis points to 56 basis points in that same time frame.
Harrison, sorry, can I ask questions?
Sure.
So incentive fees go up because that's a good thing because that means performance went up, which is great. You guys have done a great job. What's driving the incentive fee? Is it on private equity because that has the highest expense ratio, or was there other things that were driving it?
So it really comes from the source of underlying asset classes that perform well. So for this calendar year period, it was private equity, private credit, certain parts of real assets. And we actually had negative incentive fees in real estate as valuations were declining and the incentive fee accruals were being reduced. So for this year, it's primarily private equity, private credit.
Okay.
And it also comes from market neutral strategies and hedge funds as well.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Actually, can I have a follow-up on that? So
Sure.
you touched upon this, you said it was accruals. Maybe this is a naive question, but when every year you accrue the fee, is it? And then it's only when the fund liquidates the actual incentive fees paid out, is that right?
So incentive fees there's a distinction between hedge funds and private funds. So for hedge funds, the industry standard is on an annual basis, the fees get crystallized depending on whether they meet the high watermark of that particular fund. So at year end, they'll be paid their incentive fees year over year as long as they're making their positive returns. For private funds, the fees are a little bit more complicated for incentive fees. There's usually a waterfall that each fund follows. So the most common is a European waterfall where us as the investor gets back all of our contributions to the fund plus a preferred return, most commonly 8% annualized return. And then following that, the manager begins to earn an incentive fee. And that incentive fee is only paid to them when there's realizations and distributions of capital back to us.
Got it. But you're accruing it annually?
It's being accrued annually, yes.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you. Oh, one other question. Where do separate accounts fit into this analysis?
Separate accounts are included. All types of funds and all expenses are being shown in this report.
Thanks.
Okay, so in this next slide, we have our management ratio plotted over the past 9 years since 2015. We can see that the management fee ratio has steadily declined, ultimately trimming 27 basis points in management fees from 2015 to 2023. So in this graphic, we illustrate the importance of active and passive strategy allocations to the management fee ratio. With the contribution to management fees broken out in the plot on the left, we can observe that active strategies contribute the majority of management fees, while on the right we can see that 40% of the plan is allocated toward passive strategies and 60% toward active strategies in 2023. And there's actually been a steady increase in the active strategy allocation starting in 2020, going from 48% to 60%, ending in 2023. And from 2022 to 2023, our active allocation increased, while the contribution to management fees was trimmed marginally. So our investment team is highly focused on saving fees whenever possible, and our fee savings are achieved through rigorous manager negotiation, early investor discounts, and size-based discounts as well. And these tactics have amounted to a $13.7 million savings in fees for calendar year 2023, and this ultimately highlights our dedication to efficiency when it comes to costs for the plan. And this concludes the presentation. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, great presentation, Harrison. Good job.
Thank you.
Just a general high-level question. What do you sense is the trend in management fees going forward? Do you sense that it'll continue to go down, or do you think they'll start leveling off from this point forward?
So I think it should stabilize, like as we've seen in the last 2 years, they're within 2 basis points of each other. It's really driven by the asset allocation. So as the private assets have been increasing and the private allocation target has increased, there'll probably be a marginal increase in that management fee ratio, but not materially different than what we're seeing. So that's why it's flattened out compared to these earlier years like 2016, 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, and in general, Dave, we've seen there's a lot of pressure on fees for long-only strategies in the market. And as you know, there's a shift towards just beta-only strategies. Right. And active strategies have come under a lot of pressure. There's still niche strategies out there that command some kind of premium. So we prefer to actually, when we contract with these managers, try to come up with an incentive fee schedule. We try to negotiate a very low base fee and some kind of incentive fee, so our, it's aligned with the plan's expectations. But again, in private markets, I haven't seen that. Fees continue to be high, especially for the good managers, and especially in venture and private equity.
Right. But you have been negotiating for active strategies, public market active strategies. That's what you're saying.
We negotiate a lot, and you don't want to be across the table from Dinesh if you're a manager. And so
good job, Dinesh.
Yeah, we do negotiate a lot, and we also get a lot of discounts because of Makita.
Right.
Because if we are put into a strategy that Makita's other clients are there, there's also a volume discount that we are the beneficiary of sometimes.
Maybe a related question to the active strategies. Just maybe in the past, maybe just a couple of years, has the active strategies outperformed the benchmark net of the fees? Overall, on an overall basis.
Just in the last year?
No, just year.
In general?
Year, 3 years. Yeah, just high level.
Yeah, I think that's our expectation. I think a lot of our active managers have outperformed the benchmark net of fees. And managers go through cycles as well, so you will see underperformance sometimes, depending on the style of the manager and the benchmark used. But in general, we also have managers on our watch list who have underperformed the benchmark on a 1 or 3 year basis. And so we monitor them. We usually stick with those managers if they have conviction.
Right.
And the reason to terminate a manager is less performance related on a 1 and 3 year basis than staff turnover.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand all that. I was just thinking at a very high level.
At a high level,
we're still adding
managers,
value beyond.
Yeah, inefficient markets, right? Emerging markets, they still add value. Pockets of international, they still add value. Small cap, I think there's still value. But as you know, developed and U.S. large cap, it's mostly our exposure is passive.
Right.
And if you look
thank
at
you.
the quarterly report, you'll see that actually the staff have done a good job in terms of picking active managers in public equity.
Yeah.
And to carry on, just to piggyback on what Eshwar is saying, on the quarterly reports and part of the IPS that was put together, I think around 2017, 2018, we built in hypothetical portfolios to answer that exact same question. So one of the portfolios that we build as sort of a benchmark is a low-cost passive portfolio. And it's supposed to mirror what we have, but in a passive way. And at the 5-year, our portfolio is doing 7.8 versus the passive is 6.4. So, and that's net of fees.
Okay, great.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
impressive, Andrew. What are those numbers?
I was looking at it.
And going back to your original question, we do also negotiate our passive investments as well. And this previous year, we underwent a review of our passive equity firm with Northern Trust, and we actually negotiated those fees down to save about $400,000 annually per year.
Is that the 7/10 of a basis point level? Is that what I see here?
I don't think it was broken out between passive and active, but that was one of our passive negotiations.
Got it.
I think if you look at slide 2, right, the second slide, where it's very easy for somebody to look at this and say you're paying a lot of fees for private. It might be good just to have something which shows the value add from that.
Eswar, please make sure you're talking into the mic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It might be good to show how much value add the private exposure has been to the fund, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I can see if you go with the city council, they might look at a
I-
management fee of 14 million and incentive fee of 5.9. But I think over 5 years, as you said, the privates have, done what, 9.5% or something, right?
Yeah, a good point. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would support that as well. Anytime we see higher fees, I like to see that we are getting value for the money that we're paying.
Just one follow-up, if you don't mind. So the bottom part of this is our internal staff, is it? What's the green?
Yes, so these, the 1.5 million is our investment staff plus a 50% allocation for the CEO. This includes all benefits and compensation for our investment team to give you all a picture of how much our investment team
Oh,
is
okay. So
compensated
it's
as well
not,
as
it's not
part of the investment cost.
external consultants. Well, I guess it's there as well. And then on one question on process. You said you sent out a survey to managers and asked them to report. Isn't this standard reporting the amount of fees they charge? I was just curious. I didn't quite follow that.
No, it's actually not a standard, and the only requirement for California pension plans, there was a Assembly Bill 2833 that was passed in 2016. So after January 1st, 2017, for all public pensions that are making an alternative investment commitment, they're required to report on the fees of those particular investments, but they don't do it in this format. It's just certain categories in dollar terms, so it's hard to compare those. So that is something that's reported by all our peer California pension plans.
Yeah, no, my question, sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
my question was different. Don't managers have to tell you what their gross return and their net returns are?
They're not required to, no. But
Oh.
we could ask them to provide this level of fee data to help us to understand that difference, and it's something that we assess during our due diligence also, how much fee leakage is there in terms of the different categories of fees. But there's no industry standard for them to be providing this to everyone.
Okay. But I mean, if a manager said we're going to charge you 2%, anyway, we can pick this up offline.
Dinesh, I think the question is for particular managers that we have engaged with.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and yes, they are reported.
They are reporting, yes.
Yeah, there are
Yes.
capital accounts and things
Yes,
like that.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
One last question. I think it's great. First of all, Harrison, nice job on the presentation.
Thank you.
The 13.7 is great for this year. Do you have a sense of what it was last year in terms of any savings?
I think it was similar. We don't have the exact amount, but
But-
in the same ballpark.
Okay.
And this is actually a conservative number. Like in the footnotes, we talk about certain things that we didn't include in this. We wanted to just make sure like these are numbers that we can stand by.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, thank you.
All right. There are no further questions. We'll move on to item 3, old business. Discussion and action to amend the prior September 5th, 24 motion to authorize the CEO to negotiate and execute First Amendment with Saltzman and Johnson Law Corporation to increase not to exceed the amount by $250,000 from $500,000 to $750,000 through the current term.
So just a point on this this is old business because this was voted on at our last board meeting, but due to a clerical error, it is a $250,000 increase that is budgeted for in this year, but the to and from amounts were incorrect in the motion last month. So this is just correcting that motion that was passed last month.
What was it last month, sorry?
I believe it was 350 to 600.
That's correct.
It was.
Okay, I'll entertain the motion. I believe, Dick, just in the mic so it could be recorded, please.
Motion to approve.
I got a motion from Dick,
Second by Gardenier.
second Gardenier. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, moving on. New business, back to John, oral update by the CEO.
Thank you. ORS has successfully completed recruitment for 2 new benefit analysts. We expect that they will be starting mid to late October. And we are continuing recruitment for our senior office specialist position. We hope to have them in place by mid-December. Ongoing planning for open enrollment, which is scheduled for November 1st through the 30th, and we expect enrollment packets will be sent out in October. We do have ORS staff presentations scheduled for the POA and the firefighters monthly membership meeting on October 10th, and we will be at the Retiree Health Fair on November 6th. As I mentioned last time, the ORS lease is up for renewal in March of 2025. Barbara, Benji, and I have been working with our current building to negotiate terms on what could potentially be a renewal to stay in place. But at the same time, we're also looking at other spaces that are available around the city and looking at what the cost environment would be for those different locations. On Tuesday, September 24th, the internal city auditor gave their annual update to the council on the status of open city internal audit recommendations. Both Barbara and I attended. The council accepted the report. And just to note for you, one of the 12 priority items that the council has asked the city auditor to monitor is to adopt city policies and recommendation by retirement services. So we will keep working to ensure that we're addressing the recommendations made by the city auditor and to close them out before the next reporting period. I have a meeting, the city has a new interim director of finance, Drew Corbett, meeting with him on Monday to pick up the discussions between ORS and finance for the best path forward for his office to review and provide feedback on the policies that have been passed by our boards. As part of ORS's business continuity plan, our pension administration software vendor, LRS, is contracted to assist us with monthly payroll if ORS was unable to do so. ORS conducted a successful business continuity mock test last month with September payroll. We conduct this exercise annually to ensure that we know our internal processes as well as LRS is capable of performing those if we are not. Barbara and I also attended the city's continuity of operations plan tabletop event yesterday. It was an event where all the city's departments were brought together and walked through a paper-based exercise to execute upon our COOP, continuing of operation plans, identify gaps, and propose recommended updates. I'll be working with the chair to coordinate for the 9th board position interviews during the tight window between November 16th and the 26th, trying to avoid the holiday week. We don't have the final list from the clerk's office yet, but last check, we had three remaining candidates had applied. And we'll be reaching out to all of you to assess the need for we believe there's going to be a need for a special meeting between those dates. And so in order to ensure an on-site quorum, Cynthia will be working with each of you to coordinate schedules to try to make that happen in that tight time frame right before the holiday. Retirement Connection newsletters in production and scheduled to be distributed later this month. As Prabhu and his team presented the annual fee report today. We'll be presenting that to City Council on November 5th. And then lastly, in observance of Indigenous People Day, Monday, October 14th, the office will be closed. And then just a quick update on my transition. I've met with the city manager, Jennifer McGuire, who welcomed me to San Jose and provided an in-depth overview of the city of San Jose and reinforced her one-team methodology, and that the rest of the directors were here to help support me in my transition and ORS generally. I've met with many council members one-on-one and have set up reoccurring meetings with them, with most of them. Internally, I've completed my small group meetings with all of the staff and had one-on-one sessions with the ORS division managers, and looking forward to coordinating one-on-one with each of the staff members to be completed by the end of this year. I've met with some of our critical partners, some of which we'll be presenting later to you today, as from Chiron, Craig Harner from MGO, and John and Dan from LRS. We meet with Mayor Mahan tomorrow, and expect to have our one-on-one before our next meeting with Councilmember Foley. Any questions?
Yeah, great update. Just to clarify, you talked about the 9th board position. Is that the 16th or the 26th of November? Is that when everything has to happen?
Yes. So due to the timing of the application process, and we believe that it will be in our hands starting on November 16th, and we need to get it to the City Council by the 26th in order for them to be voted on in their December board meeting. Is that right, Cynthia? Sorry.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good to see you hit the ground running.
Yes.
Moving on to 4B, update from council liaison.
Great, thank you. John, I'm sorry I had to reschedule our meeting. We went, took a sister city delegation trip to Dublin, and I instructed my staff person to not schedule anything the following week because I wasn't sure about jet lag.
No
Turns
worries.
out I was perfectly awake until about 5 o'clock, and then went down from hill from there. Just a quick update or some information that might be interesting from our trip to Dublin. Most of it wouldn't have an impact or be of interest to you from the retirement board side, but a couple of things are I thought you might be interested in, and one is that they do not have an employer contribution plan to their retirement fund. In Dublin, the employees pay directly into their retirement plan, so any retirement plan that the employees have, any pension, is employee-driven, and the employees contribute individually themselves. I found that interesting, which is very different from our plan and what we offer. The other thing of interest is that their police department is not a city department. It's a national department called the Garda. You've probably seen them on TV if you watch any Irish TV or British TV or Irish TV, called Garda. But they are run and funded through the national government, which is also a different than us, because we have obviously our own city police department, which is part of our budget, part of our negotiation. You've already heard about the director of finance. We have an interim director of finance. We are looking for a new director in that position. And we are in the midst of hiring a permanent police chief, which hopefully will be announced towards the end of this month, early November. They're going through the process. When council is not part of the process, this is something that the city manager brings the name of the appointee to, or the selection to council in closed session. And then it's actually approved through her, brought in through her, and we approve it at that time. But late October, early November. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We will go to 4C, which is Chiron's up, actuarial educational presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen here. Okay, good. We're starting off our actuarial schedule for the year with an educational presentation. We know many of the board members have been on the board many years, others just a few years. It's been a while since we've done an educational presentation. So we're trying to cover the span of the different experience levels on the board. We are going to cover some of the fundamentals of actuarial funding, but also bring it back to the history of the plan and some of the specifics related to this plan. So we've started many of our evaluation presentations with this chart. The graphic on the left was published in 1965, and it still applies today. The fundamentals of how a pension plan work have not really changed during that time. You have the fund in the middle, the collection of assets, and you have two things going into that fund, the contributions and the investment earnings. And then over time, those contributions and investment earnings have to be able to pay all the benefits and expenses of the plan. And so that's the fundamental balancing that we have to structure, and part of our assessment is how much should we have in that fund at any given time in order to accomplish those goals. So if you're managing that, there were three primary levers or sets of pipes on that prior chart. There's the benefits, which are established in statute or bargaining agreements. The board doesn't really have much of any say on those benefits. There's the investment policy, which you do spend a significant amount of time on, and balancing the level of risk and the expected rate of return. Where we come in is on the contribution policy of how much and when to contribute. The division of the contributions between the employees and the city is really defined in statute, so that's not something we're doing, but the total contributions are the focus of our work. Now, when we're setting the contribution policy, there are three different objectives we look at that work in a bit of tension, and we have to balance. The overriding primary objective is benefit security. We need to make sure that we have enough assets to pay the benefits when they are due. With that, we also try and maintain a level of generational equity. Ideally, each generation of taxpayers would pay for the retirement benefits of the employees who provided them services. That never works out perfectly, and the challenge of generational equity is always when a prior generation, either intentionally or unintentionally, did not pay for all of those benefits. And then how do you spread that among the current and future generations? Along with that, we also look for contribution stability and predictability. So both members and the city have to manage their own budgets. And so the amount that we collect from them, if it bounces around a lot every year, is very hard to manage in a budget process. And so we want that to be predictable, the expectations to be clear, but at the same time, we're going to have to vary it in order to provide the assets and ensure we can pay the benefits. So those are the three fundamental tensions that we're trying to balance.
So you hire us as your actuaries to calculate your funding target. And so what is that? What we do is we project all the future pension benefits that are based on your membership and the demographics of your membership for actives, inactive members, and people who are in pay status. We look at their age and their service and their salaries, and then we also take what the plan provisions are for your system for tiers 1 and tier 2, and then we apply our actuarial assumptions about the members' behavior, such as when are they going to retire, how long are they going to live, and then we also have assumptions regarding the benefits. Are they going to have COLAs on them and your pay increases? So with all of that, we project the future cash flows of your system from now until when that last member is no longer with us. So then we take the present value of all those future cash flows and we discount them using your assumed rate of return so that we get the present value of those benefits in today's dollars. And then we have to allocate that portion of the present value of all the benefits between past and future service for the active members. So the past service for active members and for all inactive members is called your actuarial liability, and that's your funding target. And then the future value of the benefits for actives is called the present value of future normal cost. So on the left-hand side of the slide here, we have an example of that present value future normal cost, or the normal cost as we call it. And you hear that all the time when we do presentations, and that simply means the cost of the benefits that are accruing for active members for any given year. So the benefits are dependent on salaries. So what we have here, we're showing someone who's age 30 entering the system, and we're assuming they're going to retire at age 60. And so we show a projection of what their salary increases are going to be throughout their career, since your benefits are dependent on that final average salary, either a 1 year or a 3 year, depending on the tier. So this is showing that salary projection. And then this actuarial cost method that we use is called entry age, and we determine a normal cost, that cost of accruing benefit each year, based on the salary. And it's a direct relationship between the salary and the normal cost, such that over the course of the career of this member, as a percentage of pay, that normal cost as a rate is stable, is even. So we are paying into the plan that normal cost rate, the same rate over the course of the member's career. Now, looking over at the actuarial liability, the present value of those normal costs gets summed up, and at age 60, there's that funding target that we're looking at. And for this particular member, it's about $1.5 million that needs to accumulate over the course of their career to pay for their future benefits. Now, looking at how that actuarial liability how it accrues over time, you can see starting at age 30, you just have that one little block and that's that person's normal cost, and each year that person accumulates those normal costs, and those accumulations of normal costs are represented by the accrued liability in any given year. So like at age 50, you can see I think it's about $600,000 in accrued liability, and what that represents is all those past normal costs, past services accumulated with interest to that point. And over time, the funding mechanism is such that you're going to hit at age 60, you're going to have all the assets in the plan to pay for that member's benefit once they retire, in a perfect world. So for San Jose Police and Fire, in every pension system, you take all those individual normal costs and you sum them all up, and then you divide by total payroll to get a normal cost rate. And that's one component of your pension contribution, is that normal cost rate. And again, in a perfect world, if that would be the only cost to your plan if all actuarial assumptions were met. So here we're showing the normal cost rates by tier and by class. And the normal cost rates for the tier 1 for fire and police are higher than the normal cost for tier 2, and that is due to the tier 1 benefits being a little bit richer than the tier 1 benefits are richer than the tier 2 benefits. And we also are showing here the division of who pays for that normal cost. So for tier 1 members in the Muni Code, 3/11ths of that normal cost are paid by tier 1 members. But for tier 2 members, they share equally in that normal cost with the city and pay half of that normal cost rate. So in aggregate, these normal cost rates will change when you have shifting demographics. If, let's say, your normal or your average entry age for your system, or when a person enters the plan is, let's say, 29, but then your system goes and hires 10% more actives and they're all 25, right? That's going to shift the cost of those benefits because you can start funding those benefits at an earlier age, so that you might see small shifts in the aggregate normal cost rate because of those shifting dynamics. And the normal cost also changes when assumptions change, and if the plan provisions would change. So when there are deviations from this funding target, when the assumptions are not met, specifically, it's easy to think about if you have asset losses, how do you make up those changes in assumptions? And it's called what that is called is the UAL, right? If you have changes in assumptions that lead to deficiencies in that funding target. So on the left here, you see that funding target, that actuarial liability, and then on the right, you see the assets. And so there is that gap there that is the unfunded accrued liability. And we don't pay that off just immediately when it happens, right? We want to have smooth contributions and not a lot of volatility. And so we follow what's called an amortization policy to determine how you're going to fund that unfunded accrued liability. So you can see the piece of the contribution is that normal cost, that small blue bar, and then the red piece is that portion of the UL that you're going to pay off over time. So the smoothing mechanisms that we use, and we talk about this with almost every valuation, is one is the asset smoothing, right? We don't recognize a market value of assets in the valuation when we do the funding so that we can dampen the volatility, because on a market value basis, you know that the markets fluctuate, and you can see here in this graph, on the blue line, you have the market value of assets over the last 15 or so years, 20 years actually, 20 years. And you can see the spikes up and down driven by market volatility. And then the green line represents those smooth value of assets. And you can see that it's a much smoother path so that we're dampening those ups and downs of the market. And your policy is we recognize these investment gains and losses over a 5-year period. But there is a kind of a corridor around how far those actual value of assets can veer from the market, and that's 20%. The actual value of assets cannot go higher than 20% of the market, and it can't go lower than 20% of the market value. So this example here is a calculation of the actual value of assets as of the June 30th, 2023 valuation. So as I said, there's a 5-year smoothing mechanism. So we look at the investment gains and losses over the last 5 years when we do this calculation. So what we see here is we're showing the expected return on the market value of assets in each of those years. And that's based on your assumed rate of return. And then we compare that to the actual returns in the market, and you can see the swings there. And the difference between the expected and the actual return is your investment gain or loss. Now, when we talk about an investment gain or loss, it's not the same as Prabhu, right? Like we calculate an actuarial gain or loss. So if the system earns 2%, that's still a gain, but for us that would be a loss because it's less than the assumed rate of return of 6 5/8. So we look at all of these actuarial losses over the last 5 years, and then on the right-hand side, you can see the amounts that have already been recognized and the amounts that are deferred for future valuations. So the 2019 loss is exactly equal to the total 2019 loss, because that is going to be fully recognized with the 2023 valuation, because those losses have been smoothed in over the last 5 years at 20% each year. And the dark bars, the dark red and the dark green represent the amounts that have been recognized in past valuations, and the lighter areas of those bars represent the deferred gains or losses that are going to be recognized in future valuations. So what we're showing here is just those deferred gains and losses from the last valuation, and you can see that there's huge differences between 2021 and 2022 in opposite directions, right? There's a large gain in 2021 and a very large loss in 2022. And the whole purpose of asset smoothing is to smooth out the contribution volatility, right? So what we did last year, if you recall, is we took all the deferred gains and losses and added them together and then set up a new base, if you will, so that we weren't going to see that contribution volatility through the timing and recognitions of those gains and losses. So then we move on to the amortization policy. There's a lot of discussions and papers and sessions at conferences for actuaries that talk about amortization policy. And what we're showing here is the quote-unquote model policy, and this is based on all of these different papers that have been written in our profession. So the first is what type of amortization is it? There can be a single amortization or layered amortization, and most systems now have a layered amortization policy. What that means is each year when there is a UAL or a change in the unfunded accrued liability, a layer is set up based on what that change in the unfunded is that year. A single policy, a single type of amortization would mean that every year you just take your unfunded and amortize it over a certain period. So again, this gives a little bit more stability also in the contribution rates. So then next we look at the different periods that different changes in the UAL are amortized over. So the model for actuarial experiences, 15 to 20 years. For assumption changes, it's between 15 to 25 years, a little bit longer. And then plan changes are typically, for a model policy, would be amortized based on the demographics of the system. So if you had a plan change for the active members, you amortize it over the future working lifetime of the active membership. Or if it was a retirement incentive, you might have a very, very short amortization period, somewhere between 1 and 5 years. For surpluses, the model is it's a longer period, a 30-year period, for example. And then the last is how are your payments structured? There can be a 0% payroll payment growth rate, and that's like a flat payment similar to a mortgage, right? Or up to what the wage growth is. And in your plan, that's 3%. So if you compare your plan, the police and fire, to that model, you can see that you are well within a model policy, and in fact, you're a little bit conservative when it comes to your amortizations being 15 years and 20 years. And then also, what also makes your policy a little bit more conservative is that for your payment growth, and your UAL payment growth rates, we assume inflation, which is a little bit less than your wage inflation, your payroll growth, because it just gives it a little, you were paying more earlier on in the amortization schedule than you would if you just use the payroll growth rate. So the municipal code has tier 1 the city pays for the 100% of the UAL. And for tier 2, it's split 50-50 between the members and the city. And I want to kind of go back a little bit and just talk about the asset smoothing when paired with this amortization policy. the experience, it does say you have a 15-year period, but with that amortization, or with the asset smoothing, it actually takes an additional 4 years to amortize those investment gains or losses as they're phased into the actuarial value of assets.
Sorry, we have a question. When you say model policy, it's Chiron's definition of a model policy?
No, that terminology is from the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. We refer to it as the white paper on actuarial funding, and we just published the second edition about a month ago. But all the different amortization policies are categorized from model acceptable on down to unacceptable. And so what we've put up there is what was considered a model policy in that paper. I should say model in that paper means consistent with the actuarial model that's defined in that paper. And so there are situations where you would probably want to deviate from what they consider the model.
Would you say that, is this related to the actuaries and how they see it, or is this like a best practice model for plans in place?
So I was involved in writing both the first edition and the second edition of the paper. So the first edition of the paper was written in, or was published in 2014, and it was put together by actuaries from across the country, all different consulting firms, and arguing to the last detail about what was appropriate for plans and what was not from an actuarial perspective. And so then just this year we got two of the original authors combined with representatives from other firms, newer actuaries who had not been involved in the original paper, and made some updates to it, but largely it stayed intact. But it's very much a broad actuarial consensus, I would say.
Thank you.
There's also the California Actuarial Advisory Panel that puts out guidance on funding policies, and it's very similar to, they have the same terminology of model practices, and it falls within the same ranges as we're showing here.
Thank you.
So why, how do you justify that our policy doesn't include a demographic? Or what are the implications of?
So we don't have, we haven't formally defined how we would amortize any plan change, but when a plan change comes up, we have a discussion and then set the amortization. And so the plan, I think we've only had a couple, and we've typically set it at 15 years. So, which is listed as kind of a default for plan changes that affect active members.
So let me just say this in my words and correct me. So what you're saying is we don't have a policy automatic assumption. It's discussed at the board level. Is that
Correct.
Okay, thanks. I had one more thing on a previous slide, the slide 9. Is this just a coincidence that if you add up all the 5 years of investment gain and losses, I understand this investment gain loss number is essentially the difference between expected and actuals. It's actually almost zero. Is that a coincidence?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wow.
But,
So over a 5-year period, essentially the plan has met its discount rate.
Right.
Is that the way to think about it? That's a big
Very
achievement.
close.
So,
yes.
Prabhu, not only your return numbers, but also it means that you, in the last 5 years, there's been zero increase in the unfunded liability. Because
Yeah, I think that's, Makita's capital market assumptions have pretty much been accurate, I guess. Because the asset
I would
allocation
say the
is
other way
based-
around, which is basically the returns have met, I mean, you have benchmarks, but also the most important being the discount rate, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm overblowing that.
No, the asset allocation, no, it's a good question because Trustee Lanza used to bring this up a lot. Is like, you know, when you look at Makeda's expectations, how accurate are they over a long period of time? And our asset allocation is based on those expectations. So the fact that we match them is a good sign.
Maybe related to that, you know, we have a discussion about discount rate, changing discount rates. And I think the last conversation we had regarding this topic was we were thinking about increasing it. Maybe, given this information, maybe we should keep it in place.
That's the next agenda item.
Right. That's the next agenda item.
What was that, Ishwar?
No, it's just a coincidence, I think. It's not.
Okay, so before I turn it back over to Bill, we have a few scenarios here that we want to show you about the impact of these different amortization periods. So what we're seeing on the left-hand side is the outstanding balance of UAL payment or an amortization layer. And you can see over a 15-year period, it consistently is decreasing over time. And on the right-hand side, you see the amortization payments and split into two different pieces, the interest payment and the principal payment. And the interest is the dark blue and the principal is the green. And right from the start, you can see that with a 15-year amortization, there's a large sliver of principal that is being paid and increases over time. Now, if you move to a 20-year period, it's pretty much the same story. You're seeing a decrease in the outstanding balance over time, and but a slightly smaller piece of principal is being paid at the beginning, but over time, you pay it off over 20 years. Now, this last example is not model practice. It's a 30-year amortization period. On the left-hand side, I don't know if you can tell, but the actual outstanding balance grows over time. And it's about at year 10 to 12 where it is at the exact level as where it started and then starts to decrease. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the total payment, the teal line, is not even paying for the interest on that unfunded. That's why the outstanding balance grows. And you have what's called then that negative amortization piece there for about 5 years with that longer amortization period of 30 years. So 30 years now is you don't see it very often, and it like I said, it's not model practice because of that negative amortization piece.
When we wrote that first paper in 2014, 30 years was very common across the country. It was common in California. The federated plan used a 30-year amortization, but this plan did not. So this is just of interest, but that was one of the practices we really wanted to get at when we wrote that first paper is getting out of this pattern of negative amortization. But so now if we move from the theoretical to what's happening with police and fire, last year in the valuation, we established 2 layers. One was a gain-loss layer, which is shown in the light gold. So we had a loss for the year, combining various experience. I think mostly it was driven by salary increases, if I recall. This was not a large loss, even though it shows large on this particular graph. And then the purple bar were assumption changes. So we made some assumption changes from the demographic experience study last year. Ended up being a very small piece, but amortized that over 20 years. Those were the pieces from 2023. But we've been adding layers all the way back. And so when you add them all up, you get this picture, where the light gold is all the experience gains and losses, and the purple is the assumption changes. And there's a couple green ones on there that are plan changes. The green ones are very, very small. But you can see the net payment is this blue line. And that's what the net payment is each year. These are just the tier 1 amortization layers. But you can see we're forecast, and we'll keep coming back to this, we're forecast to be relatively level as a dollar amount, some slight increases for 5 years. And then there's this strong downward trend. And I just want to say, you know, each year we're going to add new layers based on what happens that year. But that downward trend is a real thing, because that downward trend is happening because we've paid off layers. And so a piece of the UAL payment that we have in the budget is going away. And so unless it's always replaced by more losses, we will see that downward trend. So if our gains and losses balance out going forward, there will be that downward trend. If we have a bunch of losses, there may not be a downward trend, but there's a significant bias towards the downward trend coming up starting in about 2030. Now, if we look at our contributions, Ann showed you the normal costs for each of the tiers. This is just putting them all together. The left side, we're showing percentages of pay, and the right side, we're showing dollar amounts. If we were 100% funded, this is what we would be paying. It's the normal cost, plus we've put the city's administrative expense contribution on top. And so the rate would be 37% of pay, and the contribution amount would be 104%. But of course, we do have the UAL to pay, and just the interest on the UAL adds a significant piece to it. 25% of pay is just paying the interest on the unfunded liability. And then with our amortizations, we are actually paying down the principal. And so that's what drives the total contribution up here. Now, normally when we show this chart, we just show the total as the city contribution. These totals are city and member combined at the top of the chart. But we're expecting a contribution of over $250 million just in fiscal year end 2025, based on last year's valuation. And more than half of that is payments on the unfunded liability.
Question?
Yeah.
What interest rate assumption do you use to calculate the interest amount? I'm sorry, I
We
probably
use
should
the-
know, but I forgot.
We use the assumed rate, which is 6.625.
The discount rate?
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't change to reflect whatever the market rate is.
No, we're not using a market rate for this.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Pam, please use your mic, because it doesn't get recorded.
No, it's a good question.
Yeah, why do you use the discount rate and not a market rate?
It's because we're not selling the debt or anything like that. We are building a funding model. So if we earn the 6 5/8, we'll get back to 100%. And so we discount those costs at 6 5/8 because we expect to earn 6 5/8 in investment returns on it. So over time, it would accumulate to get us back to the funding target. The market rate would be appropriate if someone were to buy the debt from us, for example. Then they would be looking at market prices. But we're not engaged in any sort of transaction. It's a budgeting exercise to get the plan back to 100%.
Okay.
And so those are very different purposes, and so you use different methods for them.
I'm not sure I still understand that, but thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
And I'm assuming that's the industry norm too, to use the discount
Yes,
rate, right?
yes.
Right, and another way to look at it too is that we're not invested in market, low-risk vehicles, right? The plan is invested in a diversified portfolio and expected to earn that 6.625%.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
Coming from a mortgage side of experience, I think about these things a little bit differently, but I appreciate the explanation. I just have to process it a little bit.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a good
Okay.
analogy. Let me try and draw to that. Which
Okay,
is
thank you. I
you
appreciate
would,
I
think
may
of
be
it-
the only one with this
No,
question,
no,
by the
I
way.
don't think you are. This is something that is very confusing among different constituencies. But if you think about a mortgage, a fixed mortgage, your interest rate is set at the time that you take out the mortgage.
Right.
And you do all the calculations at that interest rate because that was the basis for the transaction. You don't update in the middle for what current mortgage rates are, which is what the market price would be. So if 10 years down the road, someone is buying that mortgage, they're going to be pricing that based on what current interest rates are, not what the interest rate was at the time. And so we're not using the market price, we're using our core basis, which is analogous in some respects to the original mortgage price.
So thank you. So following along in that, if the trustees change the discount rate, that would change the interest rate that the city
Yes.
is paying on the funds. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes, it would also change our assessment of what the unfunded liability is.
Okay.
So it would change both.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
So here we just wanted to give some background on where the fund is and a little bit about why the interest on the unfunded liability is so high. So these charts are from our California survey, and the gold dot here is the San Jose Police and Fire Plan. The bars represent the range from the minimum to the maximum plan. And on the left-hand side here, we're showing the funded ratio based on the market value of assets. And so back in 2007, we were over 100% funded on a market value basis. But we were above about 3/4 of the plans. Since then, everyone dropped with 2009. You can see all the bars dropped. And this plan has actually stayed kind of in the middle of the group in terms of the funded ratio. And in 2023, we were about 80% funded, and that was just about the average for the California plans. I'll show you a little more detail on that where we are now. But in terms of the interest cost, which is that interest on the unfunded liability, you can see we were up near the top. We've come down as we've paid some things down. But that interest on the unfunded liability is represented close to 30% of payroll. And it's been very high in comparison. That has to do with the maturity of the plan. And we present that every year as part of the valuation, and we'll come back and go through it in more detail. But I just want to show you here, for example, we can click on this, and this is the distribution of plans by funded status in the California survey, and the dark blue is you. So you were 79.9% funded in the 2023 valuation. And you can see there plans that are much better funded and plans that are much worse, but you're kind of in the middle. When we look at this one, there aren't very many plans that are higher, and the plans that are higher are not as well funded. So, of course, San Jose Federated is right there. You guys are about the same in terms of your interest on the unfunded liability, but the Federated plan is only 59% funded versus 60. These other plans are some small transit plans that are higher. But the other plans that are around 80% funded, there's one. So the Alameda Serra, they're 80% funded, so about the same funded ratio as you, but the interest on their unfunded liability as a percent of their payroll is only about 12%. So that makes that unfunded liability much easier to pay for if you only have to pay 12% to cover interest versus 30% of payroll. So that's been the challenge that we've had with this plan in getting it back is it's expensive to cover that interest and to pay off the unfunded liability.
So,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dick.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, so if you look at the left side of this chart, I mean, by the way, your graphics are amazing, I must say. It's really fascinating to look at this. But how do we as trustees take the information on the left-hand side, and is there any guidance on how it should feed into our SAA conversation? Because clearly, the two statistics...
It's complicated, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's, the point is that, we have two sets of information that comes to us. What Prabhu said initially, that, since 2018, the plan has had really good returns. And then secondly, if I looked at that 5-year, by coincidence, it's been, zero, the net gains and losses. But still, our funded ratio is only at 80%. We haven't fully recovered from 2008, clearly. Are there other plans that have gone towards the 100%? What's different about them? I mean, I'm not saying you have the answers today, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, and there's a lot to look at to go into that could be different from one plan to the other. It could be that their contributions are actually higher. It could be that they've grown faster, and so they're getting more contributions as a smaller percentage of payroll to pay off that unfunded liability, which makes them less mature by our definitions. So there can be a variety of things in addition to just the actual investment return that drive that.
Yeah, I get it.
Cindy,
yeah.
Dave and I travel pretty much all around the country looking at plans from all over. It is a very complex. If you look at the city of Fresno, for example, they have a really high funding ratio. Their benefit structure is much lower. They have a drop program. They have multiple tiers. There are so many different factors that handle that funding ratio that it's really an individual type of thing based on plan. If the city of San Jose actually had the staffing level in the police department that it should, our funding ratio would completely change. But I was hired in 1995. We had 1,400 cops. What do we have now, 1,000?
We have 882 street ready. I think somewhere just north of 1,000 total, but that includes recruits, academy people that are just on disability and stuff like that. So 882.
Yeah. We have more people collected than we have paying. So to his maturity comment.
And then also Fresno, which is an outlier on the funded ratio. They timed a POB perfectly.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I'm not quite sure how long ago it was.
20
years ago.
20
I mean, they did it at the perfect time, and that's why another reason why they're over 100%.
But this in itself is very helpful, thank you. I mean, I think that's what I was wondering about. then maybe we are, it's almost too difficult to get towards 100% for us, given the maturity of the plan.
I'll defer to Bill, but I think the IRS has 100%, considering fully funded, is not actually 100%. It's a high level. I mean, you look at the city of Dallas a few years ago, they had a run on the bank. People just took the money out and didn't take the retirement. So that's another factor. Right? There's so many factors.
So I'm assuming that all those factors that you just mentioned about the plans, they're all related to why our interest cost is on the upper end of the spectrum, and that there's really no way for us realistically to get from like the 30% to the 20 or 10% of some of these other plans. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so that's just a fact that you have to deal with your current population and structure for this system. So obviously that 30%, it's 30% of payroll. If you hired 400 more officers, your payroll is going to go up, but that interest is not going to go up. So that 30% would be a much smaller percentage of payroll, but it would be the same dollar amount. So you have to have the revenue in the city's budget to pay for all of that. But what we're getting to here is we do have pretty high contribution rates, and part of the reason for that is this high interest cost that we have to pay, and then we are trying to aggressively pay down the unfunded liability at the same time.
I think I like what I heard. He said hire more cops.
So I did want to say, I think it may be in the other presentation, but the California survey charts here are available on our website, and I put the link in the appendix of the presentation so you can go in and play with it and look at the different systems and see what's there. There's a variety of measures. We'll show more when we get to the economic assumptions. So we hope that that's a resource for you. We did receive some comments. Some board members have seen this, that we should create a dot that's a combination of federated and police and fire for use for the city. I have not added that yet, but it's on my list to add to the graphics. But that's just publicly available, and you can access it and see where systems stand. So this doesn't get to how all the other systems did, but looking at just police and fire, how did we go from being over 100% funded in 2007 to where we are today? And this is looking at the change in the unfunded liability by year and splitting it between the investment gain or loss on the actuarial value of assets. So that's on that smooth 5-year value, so it's not going to match up with the investment returns exactly. Liability gains and losses, so our retirement rates, mortality rates, salary scale, all of those sorts of things. Contributions, how much were we paying down the unfunded liability, or did we get behind? Assumption changes and benefit changes. And so I just want to focus on some things individually so that you can get a sense of what is driving this. First, really, this does not capture the effects of putting in Tier 2 or some of those changes, because that changed benefits going forward. It didn't change the unfunded liability at the time. So really the 2012 benefit change was the elimination of the SRBR, which was a supplemental payment system, and then in 2017 there's a very small piece that was the changes to Tier 2 that happened at that time. If you want to look at our contribution policy and what it's done, right after 2009, it took some time for us to adjust to the significant changes that happened. We also reduced discount rates and had investment losses. But really, since that time, every year we've been paying down the UAL. So if I wasn't clear before, things going below zero are paying down the UAL, and that's good. We want to be below zero. But it's been consistent that we are paying down the UAL with the contributions. So that's a very good, strong contribution policy. I'd say we've done some studies looking at national plans, and it's only about half the plans are paying down the UAL in any given year. And it's a much smaller percentage that do it consistently like this. So this is really a good sign for the system. If we look at the liability gains and losses, for the most part, they've been small. The big gain in 2011 is something we don't really want to go through again. That was when everyone took a 10% pay cut. That really does help the pension, but it created a lot of other angst. But these others have been relatively small. We are seeing some losses due to salary increases here and in other places because we went through the period of high inflation, and so there have been some salary increases to catch up. So that's something for us to monitor going forward. But on the whole, the liability gain and loss has been okay. This is where we're getting a lot of the losses came from investment returns. Particularly, you've got the 2009 losses in that period. And then it continued until 2021. Since then, we've been much stronger. Now, reminder, these are not individual years investment returns. This is that 5-year smoothed return. So you're capturing a longer period. And you can see by 2023, it's a very small sliver. 2024, we'll have a slight gain because we're only recognizing 20% of the gain from this year, and we have a little piece of a loss from the prior years. If you put on the assumption changes, so this is largely assumptions bringing down the discount rate year after year in small steps from 8% down to 6 5/8 over time. And so that's been a significant chunk each time we do that, adds to the liability. The one gain year we had was 2017. 2015 we put in generational mortality, and that was part of that assumption loss. In 2017, we modified that scale, which took back some of the change that had taken, and we also reduced the salary scale because salaries had been much lower than we had expected. The other thing I want you to note here, though, is the last 2 times we've had assumption changes, 2021 and 2023, they're just tiny slivers. So we think that we've gotten the assumptions down to where they need to be, and so we don't expect that going forward. But if you pull all these together, and we can put the others on here, you can see it's really the investment experience and the assumption changes that created the unfunded liability. So That's 850 million in net investment losses, and 811 million in net assumption changes, getting us to the total was about $1.2 billion increase in unfunded liability. So does that make some sense about where our unfunded liability came from and what drove it? And that also leads to the question about caution about changing assumptions, which we'll get into in the next presentation as well.
And the assumptions here, when you say assumptions, is primarily the discount rate, or?
It's primarily the discount rate, but not exclusively.
I guess I still don't have a good intuition around why, on one hand, we hear from Prabhu that in the last 6 years, we have had $2 billion of gains, plus minus, rounded up. Whereas here, what happened to your chart?
Sorry.
I guess it's the time.
Yeah, so there's two things going on there. One, I think Prabhu's talking about gains from zero as opposed to compared to the expected return. So there would be a substantial expected return. We are talking about the difference between the expected return and the actual return.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. And then the other part of it is the time. If you look at this, I think Prabhu was talking about the last 5 years.
The 2 billion was 6 years. In the last 5 years, as Andrew mentioned, the return was net of fees was 7.8.
Yeah, so if you
and the discount rate has been going down, but I would think in the last 5 years it's closer to 6.75 or 8, somewhere between 6.75 and 7, right?
We've been at 6 5/8 for 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years, so about the same then. Yeah.
But here you're looking at 5-year smooth returns reported in each year. And so you can see a large part of those losses happened well before the time Prabhu's talking about.
Got it, thanks.
Okay, we've took more time than we planned for this, but just to conclude, we do think the plan has a very strong contribution policy. One of the aspects of that, there's a couple things. We are paying down the unfunded liability, and that's a really good thing. The flip side is that means our contributions are high, and we recognize that they are high compared to peers and others. Really, the unfunded liability that we're trying to pay off is largely driven by the investment experience compared to our assumptions, and to us changing those assumptions and reducing them. We do think that it's critical if we want to hit expected contribution levels that we have reasonable assumptions, and we like to maintain a neutral to conservative bias on those assumptions so that there's a slightly greater chance that costs in the future go down compared to what we expect than they go up. Because the problems we've seen are when they start ratcheting up and it's hard to catch up with the contribution levels that are needed.
Bill, thank you for the educational. I mean, you learn something every time you watch this or look at this, so thank you for that. I just want to go back. I'm just curious about generational equity, and how do you measure that, and how does that factor into your recommendations?
How you measure it, yes. It's generational equity is a principle. it's very difficult to measure. And my own view is if you look at government spending, there's all sorts of transfers between generations. Whether future generations get a benefit out of the security we provide today because it helps the economy grow. They certainly get benefit out of expenditures on education and those sorts of things. So what we look at is really how quickly can we pay for the past sins, and can we make sure we have reasonable assumptions so we don't create new unfunded liabilities that are passed on to the future. The dealing with the past is a combination of kind of an actuarial thing and a policy that the board has to wrestle with. The actuarial side is we want you to be paying more than the interest on the unfunded liability so that you are moving towards paying down the unfunded liability. How quickly that gets done is, we have guidelines from experience, but there's a lot of input that has to come from the board over exactly where that falls.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And I would say, in my own view, let me just take an extreme case. If I was advising Chicago, which is very terribly funded and has a huge unfunded liability, I'm not sure I would tell them to pay it off in 15 years because the costs of that would be astronomical and would have severe implications on the city. So you've got to kind of balance these things and figure out what the best approach is in your individual situation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I think you still have the next one.
Yep. Let me switch over here. Out of that. Okay. So every year we start our actuarial cycle looking at the economic assumptions for the pension plan. You'll get to see us the next few months. It just kind of a reminder of our plan here. We skipped the January board meeting, but we'll be here November, December, and February with more actuarial fun. But today's assumptions go into all of those pieces, and so we need to get a decision on the assumptions. But before we do the assumptions, we wanted to give you a quick update on where the plan stands, just reflecting the investment returns. So this assumes all other assumptions are exactly as we, all other experiences exactly as we projected. We know that's not exactly the case. And so we're in the process of examining that, and we'll have more information on that at the next board meeting. But ignoring that, the investment returns would increase the funded ratio on a market value basis from about 80% to about 84%, and from an actuarial value basis from 80% to 82%. That's reducing the UAL down to 1 billion or 1.1 billion. So again, there's significant variability still depending on what we do between now and the valuation. But the chart on the left is showing the projected pay down of the unfunded liability And the blue line shows what it was in the 2023 projection, and so you can see we would be paying it down faster, reflecting the investment gains this year.
This is after smoothing for the 24 returns? The 80 to 84 and the 80 to 82 is after
The
smoothing?
80 to 84 is no smoothing. The 80 to 82
Yeah,
is
sorry.
with smoothing.
Yeah.
So this is the same thing, looking at our projections of contribution rates on the left and amounts on the right. And the blue line was the projection from the last valuation, and the bars are representing what it would look like reflecting the investment returns. So you can see slight reductions in those projections based on the investment gains. Again, it's very slight in the first year because it takes 5 years for those to fully play through.
So moving on to the economic assumption review, we come to you every year and review the economic assumptions. And the demographic assumptions we only look at every other year, and so that next study won't be until 2025. So the assumptions that you adopt today will be used in our 2024 actuarial evaluation, and that will determine the contributions for the fiscal year ending 2026. So we're going to look at price inflation, wage inflation, which are both used in both the pension and OPEB valuations. And we'll look at the amortization payment increase rate and the discount rate. And we are not recommending or proposing any changes to these assumptions except for the possibility of considering increasing the wage inflation assumption from the current 3% to 3.25%. And if you recall, last year when we came to you at this time, we also proposed considering an increase in this wage inflation assumption, but the board decided to maintain it at 3% in case the discount rate was going to increase this year, and then the changes could be made together. So to reiterate, though, we are not recommending a proposed change in the discount rate, and we're saying that you can consider increasing the wage inflation from 3 to 3.25. Starting with price inflation, and we do this because this is a building block to a couple of the other economic assumptions. It's the building block to the wage inflation and the expected rate of return. And that current assumption right now is 2.5%. And this assumption has very limited direct impact on your valuation. And that's because your Tier 1 COLAs are fixed at 3%, regardless of any inflationary indices. And then also there's the Tier 1 does have some guaranteed purchasing power provision for very few older retirees. And then Tier 2 COLAs are tied to the Bay Area Inflation Index, but they're capped at 2%. So anytime your inflation assumption is greater than that cap, it doesn't have an impact on the actuarial assumptions. So everyone has been talking about inflation for the last 3 years and how high it's been, but actually for the year ending August 31st of this year, year over year, the inflation was about 2.5%. So it's this continuing downward trend over the last couple of years here. And a good market indicator of future inflation expectations is something called break-even inflation. And that's simply the difference between the yields on your standard U.S. Treasuries and the yield on TIPS. And the lines here indicate looking at inflation, this break-even inflation over different time horizons. The green line looks at the 5-year outlook. The yellow line is the next 6 to 10-year outlook of inflation, and then we also have the 20-year future expectations of inflation for the blue line. And those are all between just under 2% to about 2.34% in all those time horizons. And here we have survey of inflation assumptions. The left two bars are professional economists and also investment consultant surveys. On the very left is the economist survey, and that's over a 5-year time horizon. And then that horizon survey is based on about 40 different investment consulting firms across the country. And you can see those expectations are very close to each other, even though the economic forecasters is a 5-year, and then the horizon survey is over a 20-year period. And the far two right bars are representing assumptions from public sector pension plans. The one on the left is for public plans across the country from the public plan database, and then on the right is our California survey of the large systems in California. And the median assumption for these plans is right at 2.5%. So that, with the fact that Makita's assumptions are also within that very similar range from 2.4 to 2.8, we are proposing no changes to the inflation assumption.
I wonder why Makita has 20-year at 2.8 and 10-year at 2.4. That's a big difference. I'm just curious.
Question. There are so many inflation numbers, you know. We're probably mixing and matching a wide variety of inflation numbers. I'm sure that up here you have like probably 10 or so inflation numbers. What's the most important inflation number that the plan should be worried about? I mean, I'm assuming it's the one that's going to impact the fund valuation the most.
Well, it's interesting. As I said on an earlier slide, the actual inflation assumption for your plan doesn't have much of an impact on the results. So where it does have an impact can be the salaries, like the salary increases, but if you remember, your plan is so mature, you have so many retirees that your liabilities are so heavily weighted on the retiree liability, which is not impacted by the inflation assumption. And so when there are large increases in inflation or wage growth, it doesn't impact the plan nearly as much as other things like asset returns.
But I think we would expect Bay Area inflation to influence salary growth, whereas if you're looking at the real return on investments, you'd want to look at national inflation. And then whether you use CPIU, W, or PCE, all of this we're showing variations of CPIU.
So you stated that it doesn't really have a huge impact.
No direct impact.
Direct. Okay. So what kind, I'm assuming you've done some sensitivity analysis and you tweaked that number. What kind of changes would I see if you adjust some of the price inflation numbers here
So
on the unfunded liability?
Yeah, so, and we'll get into this when we talk about the wage inflation, because higher inflation would tend to cause higher wage inflation, which would have an impact on our liabilities. And so we'll save that for just a couple slides. In the broader sense, it is really, how do you think it affects the real return? So if you have higher inflation, does that lower your real return and your nominal return stays the same, or does your real return go up? So that it's a little bit more mixed how you interpret that impact.
Okay, thank you.
I would say that, if you look at the last few years, right, I mean, that inflation changed quite a bit, right? Very low to high, and it's come down. The thing which I've tracked is the five-year inflation. And if you go to the St. Louis Fed website, you can track it. And that was very strongly anchored, didn't change very much during this whole period. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's that gold line there, the five-year forward. And we added that a couple of years ago. I was on a panel to talk about inflation, and they had an economist from the CBO on the panel. And we were asking him beforehand what his long-term view of inflation was, and they simply decide that the Fed is correct. And so after about 5 years, they assume the Fed hits their target. But others were saying, yeah, look at the 5-year forward, because that takes out the short-term noise, and it's what people are projecting for a long-term stability.
So then your question about how does price inflation affect the valuation, and as we said, it doesn't have as a direct impact, but to the extent that price inflation has a impact on wage inflation, it can impact the projected salaries of your active members. So here we're looking at the components of the salary increases that we use in our valuation. And again, that's that building block of inflation of 2.5% and the real wage growth of 50 basis points, and that makes up the wage inflation. And then on top of that, there's also merit or step increases for all the employees, and that amount varies by service. You know, the earlier on in your career, you get higher merit increases, salary increases, and then they kind of taper off as you move through your career unless you get a promotion. So then on the right-hand side, we have another one of these distributions of this is of wage inflation for all the large systems in California over time. And you can see that that wage inflation assumption, that trend has come down since 2007. Your wage inflation has been around 3% for the last 4 years. You right now are at the median in California, and have been at the median for the last couple of years. And if you want to look at the distribution, that B swarm for 2023, there you are, that blue dot there, and there's a number of systems above you that are at 3.25, and some systems that are slightly below. So most systems, you know, it's the median, and the most common assumption for wage inflation is at your 3%. However, if you look at the people who are, or the systems who are at the higher level, there's 7, and most of those systems are here in the Bay Area with the 3.25% wage inflation, with the exception of the city of San Diego and LA County. So very, very large systems. But again, there's there's about 24 systems that are right at the 3%.
So among the 7 that are at 3.25%, they have a higher discount rate?
What's that?
Can you hover around the 7 systems? What is their discount rate? Oh, that it doesn't say that.
So there's Alameda, Golden Gate Transit, San Francisco, San Mateo, and then the UC systems.
So there's a few of them that are below yours, and there's several that are higher.
Okay, 'cause I thought you said last year, and I vaguely recollect that we wanted to sort of have some parity between this and the discount rate. That's why I was asking.
That's what will drive the costs for active members, is what that spread is.
So the proposal is to change it to 3.25, right?
To consider.
Consider, right.
Yeah.
And that would be the highest on that chart
That would be the highest.
Right.
of the clients or that
In
you know
California, yeah.
in California.
Among the highest, yeah. So the context for looking at the wage inflation, and we like to look at the peers and see what they are doing, but it's also more important to look at, you know, your system and what's happening, right? So the chart on the left is showing a general wage inflation data across the country, and not just for police and fire plants, but all local governments. And over the last 5 and 10 years, the wage inflation has been, for 5 years, about 4.25, and then about 4% over the last 10 years. But when you look over the course of a 20-year period, that wage inflation for local governments has been about 3.15%. And then turning to your recent bargaining agreements over, the last 4 years, those bargained increases are well above the 3%. And then even the new bargained agreements that are going to happen in 2024, 25, and then for the fire 26 and 27, again, those increases are above that 3%. So you have a history of having higher wage inflation than the assumption right now. And that's reflected in, the inflation that's been going on the last few years, but also the job market for your members, right? It's very competitive to try to retain and get new officers and firefighters. So we do take into account these bargained agreements in our evaluation when we know about them. But when there's no bargaining agreement, we use that 3% wage inflation assumption going forward.
Do we know what these numbers were pre-COVID? Like the 5 years before COVID, because these all
they were lower.
They're lower.
Yeah, but I don't know off the top of my head, but they were definitely lower than this.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that's when we dropped it to 3 because we'd had several years where the bargaining agreement, the ultimate increase was 3, and we'd had a lot of salary gains, salary increases lower than expected.
Yeah.
That's clearly reversed the last few years. But the difficult question is how much of it is a temporary adjustment reflecting inflation and some of the changes in the economy, and how much is longer term and more ongoing.
Right. The reason not to change it would be that these are temporary changes because you had a change in inflation level, and maybe you go back to trend.
Correct. There's one other reason potentially to delay a change, which we'll get to.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the bargaining agreements, and you have the recent bargaining agreements with fire. We're in the midst of negotiating with police right now, but you're not estimating what that may be. How will that impact the assumptions when the bargaining units have when we have reached an agreement with?
So right
PD.
now, since there's no agreement, we're in the middle of the evaluation. For those years where there's no agreement, we will use a 3% assumed wage growth. So if the increases are higher than that, then we're going to be projecting benefits that once those agreements come into place, there will be higher salary increases, which will lead to higher projected benefits. So there will be small actuarial losses in the plan on the liability side because we're projecting higher benefits than we assumed at the 3% wage growth.
And thank you, and will that result in increased UAL?
Yes.
Okay.
But again, these salary increases, there will be actuarial losses on them if that happens, but they're not as material as these bigger asset losses because they only are for the active members.
Thank you for that clarification. That's always important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, so we looked at this based on the 2023 valuation. We don't have the new data, but this kind of increase would increase member contributions by about 0.3% of pay, and the city by about 0.8% of pay, which was roughly $3 million. So that gives you a sense of what the impact would be. Those numbers will be different in the 2024 valuation, but that should be the right ballpark.
And the UAL, I believe, increased about 13 million.
Yeah, 13 or 14 million.
Based on your current unfunded is 1 billion.
Important to know as we
Right.
get ready to look at the budget for next year and what our economic situation is at that point. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So the amortization payment increase rate is the assumption on how fast your UAL payments, or how at the rate at which they increase each year. I would say most systems that I work on have that payment increase rate equal to the wage inflation, so that the UAL payment increases at the same rate as your assumed pay, so it stays an even percentage of payroll. So this is being a little bit more conservative. They're not increasing as fast. And so if your payroll growth is that 3%, you're going to see your UAL payment decreasing slightly as a percentage of payroll if your payroll increases at 3%. So we are recommending to maintain this assumption to be tied to the price inflation of 2.5%. So the discount rate, this is really one of the most impactful assumptions we have in our actual evaluation. And going back to earlier this morning when Bill was describing the contributions plus interest equal benefits plus expenses, if you are assuming you have a higher expected return, more investments coming into the plan, you will have lower expected contributions, and vice versa. However, over time, it's important to note that the actual contributions will really depend on the actual investment returns and not your assumed rate of return. It's the discount rate can be looked at as a budgeting tool, if you will. So the current discount rate we have right now is 6.625%. And when we review this assumption, we look at a couple things for context, such as the historical experience and industry trends. But the primary factors that we consider when looking at the discount rate are the expectations for the future and your risk preference. So on the left-hand side, we have the chart that shows the returns over the historic returns over the last 10 years. The return on the market value are the blue bars, and the return on the actual value are the green bars, and then that assumed rate of return is that red line. And you can see that in most, over the course of this last 10 years, it's been about half and half where you've met your assumption or you haven't met your assumption. And then on the right-hand side, we have another one of those distributions, and this is showing the different discount rates throughout the state of California, going back to 2007 when your discount rate was around 8%, which was the median at that time. And you have continued to drop that rate and have really been either at the median or below for the rest of this time frame here. And you can see right now in 2023, that you are slightly lower than the median, which is at 6.75 for California. So there are 16 different systems right now at 6.75, and the two that are right below that are you and San Jose Federated. And then there are only 7 systems that have lower discount rates than you. And one of them, the one that's at 6%, is a closed transit plan. But there has been movement still, even in this, in this economic environment. And I say that because capital market assumptions are higher than they've been historically. But plans are still continuing to reduce rates, not quite as fast, and we have not seen anyone increase their discount rate in the last couple of years.
So to just put in historical perspective what's happened and what drove those changes, you can think of the expected return as broken into like a risk-free rate and then an expected risk premium on top of that. And so if we use the yield on the 10-year treasury as what the risk-free rate was at the time, you can see that the expected risk premium has gone up dramatically historically. Back in 1995, you could get 6.2% on a 10-year treasury. So targeting an 8% return, you only had to beat the treasury by 1.8%. as those interest rates have gone down, we've brought the discount rate down, but not as quickly as interest rates went down. And so that risk premium went up. That affected asset allocations, that's affected a lot of things. But we hit that bottom right around 2020. And with inflation hitting and then the Fed increasing interest rates, we've now really changed that. So the yield on the 10-year Treasury, I didn't look at it what it was today, but I think that's a June 30th number, is 4.3%. And so that has significantly reduced that expected risk premium we have to take to achieve the expected return. But you can see how dramatic that change was in just a couple of years. Actually, if we broke it down and showed you by year, it's very dramatic when it happened.
Hey, Bill, question.
Yeah.
Didn't we reduce the discount rate in the last 4 years? I feel like I've been on the board for the last 4 years and we did one decrease, I thought.
No, we've kept it at 6 5/8 since 2020.
Yeah, okay.
So every year, we look at a couple different sets of capital market assumptions. We use Makita's because they're your investment consultant. They know your portfolio the best, which is particularly important for the private asset classes. But we want to make sure to keep Makita honest. So we also compare to a survey of capital market assumptions that's done by Horizon. And so it's got 42 different investment consultants in their 10-year time horizon and 20-year, 27 in the 20-year time horizon category. And so with that survey, there's a little bit of issue matching up asset classes, but we think it gives you a good perspective on the different capital market assumptions. You can see for both the median under a 10-year time horizon is 7.2. When you go to a 20-year time frame, Makita's a little more optimistic than all the survey participants, but it is a higher assumption, 7.5 from the survey and 8.4 for Makita.
So when you say passive, that's S&P 500 or what's that?
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
I
it's a
can't
60/40.
remember how specific. The appendix here has the asset class specified, and it's whatever the investment consultant specifies for that asset class. They don't specify the actual benchmark, but it will. I just can't remember, for example, if it's U.S. equity as a whole or large cap is separated from small and mid, sort of thing.
Okay.
But those details are in the back
In the
if
back,
you
okay.
want to look. So then we also look at this historically, and I've changed this chart this year, so let me explain what we're doing. The gray bars represent the range from the 45th to 55th percentile expectation, because we didn't want to just focus on the 50th. And then the gold line is the 6.625%. And so you can see how these things have changed over the years. The top chart is showing the 10-year horizon and the bottom, the 20-year. So from 2020 to 2022, we were within the gray bar for the 20-year horizon and slightly above it for the 10-year horizon. But then when interest rates went up, the assumptions changed dramatically. And they've come down a little bit this year, but not a lot compared to last year. We are, on a 10-year horizon, we're slightly below that 45 to 55 range, and on a 20-year horizon, we're quite a bit below. That means that we have a greater than 50% chance under these assumptions of achieving our expected return. We've typically looked at trying to be that our appropriate time horizon is somewhere between 10 and 20 years because about 40% of the present value is paid out over 10 years. I think it's 12 or 13 where we get to 50% of the present value of the pension fund is paid out. So you can see here that there is a basis and an argument for increasing the discount rate. We are not recommending that, however. The increase in the capital market assumptions was really driven by the rise in interest rates. And the Fed's reduced their target rate by 50 basis points. They're expected to reduce it further. So we're not sure how long the higher capital market assumptions would last. It was very painful bringing that discount rate down because every time we brought it down, it affected member contributions, it affected the city's contributions. We had to bring it down in small steps so that it wasn't too dramatic. It's fine for the discount rate to be less than the expected return. The opposite is problematic because then you're building in losses. So we're proposing no change this year. If I think it would be fair to say that if the Fed drops their interest rates and capital market assumptions remain elevated, it'd be a discussion we'd want to have next year. But we're just not confident that the capital market assumptions have settled at kind of a long-term level yet, and so we're hesitant to encourage any increase in the discount rate at this point.
So Bill, we're obviously on the outlier in terms of the other plans, right? From one of your previous charts, in terms of being lower than most of the other California plans.
I wouldn't describe you as an outlier anymore, but you are at the low end. If you
It sounded like us and Federated were the only ones that were below. That's what I remember from your chart.
Now here's the distribution. We're the two plans at 6 and 5/8. So there are 7 plans in California that are below you. And the majority of plants are just an eighth of a point
we're below
above.
the median,
So you're slightly below the median, really.
And I'm just curious, I understand that there's a tug of war between the long-term expected returns and the discount rate. But if you sort of look at slide 15, and obviously we're the period of zero interest rates is behind us. Maybe we're not going to be at 4.31%. But even if you if you look back at 2015 and say interest rates, the yield settles at about 2.36%. Our discount rate was higher than it is now. Is that something we should consider?
I would have to go look at what 2015's capital market assumptions were, but I think if we settle at a higher yield in the 2.5 to 3 range for 10-year treasuries, we could end up with higher capital market assumptions that would support a higher discount rate than what we have now. But we may not. I would really like to see what those capital market assumptions were.
I mean, I would say that in the interest of bridging the unfunded liability, it's best to keep it where it is. To the extent that we do better than 6.6 and 5/8, I think it's better for the plan. I think if it comes a day where we do really well, we're in surplus, we could consider that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And speaking for the plan members, at least my side, the police, they're used to the contributions where they're at, and changing it and then changing it again and changing it again is probably more problematic than just keep moving forward, chip away at that unfunded liability, and move forward at that rate.
I agree with Eshwar and Dave.
I have no objection to that, but I kind of find it a little hard that we are using capital market assumptions as a barometer for this. And that's when I think I've said this in previous years as well. It's like, tail wagging the dog. Which one is the tail, which one is the head, That's my only concern. So, if you're saying our barometer is interest rates, which, obviously is critical for any long-term pension plan, we are at a different regime than we were in 2020.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is that the interest rates and the capital market assumptions are linked. And so we're concerned about where the capital market assumptions are going because of where interest rates are going.
Yeah, I understand that point, but I think capital market assumptions are capital market assumptions. And, they'll drive our returns. Our liability discount rate should be driven by the level of interest rates, not what we expect our returns to be. Because we could increase our risk level and increase our returns, in our SAA. I feel otherwise it becomes tautological, but anyhow, I think there are smarter people in this room who can probably express that better than me. It's okay, we could stay here and debate that forever. That was my
Yeah, I was going to say, we can do another educational session on that concept, because that's a hotly debated topic about how those different models work and when you should use one versus the other.
Yeah, but if we are using interest rates as a driver, just from a modeling perspective, it's hard to keep at 6.625%. I understand there are other considerations of stability, but I think we just need to recognize that we're not at the 0% interest rate environment or 0.73%. We're not at the 4.31. We're somewhere in the middle, and we are keeping our discount rate where it is. I understand the pros of it being that we might beat it and reduce unfunded liability, but in a pure modeling sense, it just makes me uncomfortable.
I would say, the goal of this is kind of stability to the plan, right? Not being accurate, because we're not going to be exactly right.
But then you should never change assumptions. Why bother with this discussion?
We should be very slow in changing assumptions. In fact, if having gone through the presentation, I would say we should not change inflation or the discount rate. Just keep it where it is. That would be my recommendation, but we're not there as yet.
I agree. I think we have to keep in mind that this is not a short-term plan. This is a marathon.
But what is the horizon then? 2020 to 24, we haven't changed anything. 4 years. What is a long horizon for stability? Stability, I agree, is a big criteria.
Yeah.
But if you have regime shifts.
Yeah, I think to the extent that the unfunded liability, actually we're closing the gap. That was the goal of all of this. So I would say we're doing the right thing. So supposing the unfunded liability goes in the other direction, then maybe I say we're doing some wrong things.
Yes, agreed.
So-
we have been chipping away at it.
Yeah.
We're approaching what I think I saw 82% funded. So we are slowly getting to the goal line.
Yeah, it looks like, I think one of your graphs showed unfunded liability dropping off significantly by 2037.
9, I think.
39.
I
think it was?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Eswar. As conditions change, we make those type of decisions. But right now, it's working.
Mhm.
We also have to remember that anything that we do in that realm not only affects the employee, but also affects the city's budget. And I think the city would like stability as well, so they can plan for their budgets. What do we exactly need to
I
decide
actually-
today?
Can I add a comment? As Bill pointed out and Harp pointed out, that there are two factors, right? We have the expected returns and we have our risk preference. I think Sunita brings up a good point, is that, what is our risk preference based on the interest rate regime? I would support staying where we are, but I think it's it's something that we have to pay close attention to, where we are on risk.
So we have one more topic that I've failed to introduce because I skipped over the agenda slide that I'd like to get through. And then what you need to decide are the assumptions we've gone through here, which we're essentially proposing no changes. And I'll explain the wage inflation position on that at the end. The other change we need to, or we want to raise with you, is really a technical change internal to the allocation of the city's tier 1 amortization payment between police and fire. So police and fire in tier 1 have always been pooled together. And so before there was a tier 2, we just received one asset number and everything was just in the same pool. We did do separate charges, separate normal cost charges reflecting the slight differences in plan provisions and the populations. And whenever there was a benefit change, that amortization was charged separately to police and fire. But all the gains and losses and all the assumption changes were allocated in proportion to the tier 1 payroll, so that they were essentially paying the same rate of pay on the UAL. And so that's been the history up through today. If you look at our reports, we just report a tier 1 asset figure. We don't have a tier 1 police asset and a tier 1 fire asset figure. When tier 2 came along, it did require separate accounting of the assets. And so ORS started tracking tier 2 police assets and tier 2 fire assets. And then around the same time, they also started splitting that single pool into a tier 1 police pool and a tier 1 fire pool. And so they've tracked those separately. They're still in the same trust. They're still just legally one set. Tier 2 technically is part of that same trust, so the assets are fungible across. We've kept them pooled. And over time, because of the different patterns in changing from tier 1 to tier 2 and the different growth or declines in the populations, that's resulted in the tracking of the city's UAL contribution going more towards fire than it used to. And so those, the UAL payments are not aligned perfectly with the way the individual assets are tracked. So the question is, do you care? We could change things so that they do match the way it's tracked, or we can keep going with it as it's pooled. It does not affect the members at all. It does not affect the amount the city pays. It just affects whether it goes into the police tier 1 bucket or the fire tier 1 bucket. So instead of, for example, if it was $200, instead of putting $100 in each bucket, we might be changing that allocation, but it would still add up to the $200.
So this is basically just a tracking change.
It's a tracking change, and the question is whether it matters to you or not. Our reports still show it as pooled, and all the amortizations are tracked the same way. So we're not sure that it matters, but even if you don't want to change it, you want to keep it pooled, we are suggesting that instead of allocating it based on tier 1 payroll, we allocate it on total payroll, because we're getting to the point where over the next 15 to 20 years, the tier 1 payroll is declining and going away, and that allocation will get kind of bumpy. And so it'd be more stable to allocate it on the total payroll. But if you want it to match up with the way the assets are being tracked, we would allocate it differently.
Question, would there be any legal liability issues when you start going down that path?
I wouldn't think so, because it's the city's payment. I mean, if I remember from the Measure B days, I think for at least police, we do pay a very, very small, like 0.04% or something into the UAL, but that payment's made by the city. So whether it's tracked for police and fire or all together, it's still their payment.
Yeah, any of those separate payments, those related back to plan changes, and I think if they're not done, they're almost done. Those aren't really affected. It's just the experience gain loss and the assumption changes, and it's just how the city's payment is allocated. It doesn't change the amount of the payment, it's just whether it's allocated to police versus fire.
Right, and then to answer that question more directly, so all the funds from the contributions that we receive from the members and the city, they all go into the same trust fund. It's only within our own trust fund that we're allocating and tracking, or so to speak, earmarking certain buckets. So when tier 2 happened, we started allocating that contribution within our own accounting system. So that's the question for this board, is do we want to follow a similar model for tier 1, which we have done for tier 2 at this juncture?
Right, so in essence, there's been an imbalance because things change between police and fire. And one of the systems is more or less getting shortchanged and the other one's making up for it. I don't know if it's significant or not. The trust is at a whole, but the bookkeeping on it is being affected. I don't know how it's going to affect the unions or anything like that, and I'm part of it, but I believe in doing what's right is right, and everybody gets accounted for appropriately. So I would lean towards making the change.
Is this going to cost us more money in tracking? For tracking? Okay, then I have to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me.
No. Yeah, and then the other question we raised is can we, if you want to change it, can we just change it immediately, which will appear to be a significant change if you look at police and fire separately, or do you want some sort of transition to that change? And from an actuarial standpoint, we would go for the immediate quick change, but really it doesn't matter since it's all part of the same pool. We're just not sure how, if that UAL rate has an impact somewhere else that someone's using it for some other purpose, and a significant change all at once would disrupt however they're using it.
The only thing I think that this could be an issue with all at once is all of a sudden either police or fire, depending on which one it is, shows a significant UAL difference, and now Andrew has to go sell it to local 230 and I have to go sell it to the POA. That's the only thing that I could see being an issue. Otherwise, it's like we talked about, it's just bookkeeping and making it right. So,
but at the end of the day, I mean, the numbers are not going to change, dollar amount.
The
UAL is not going to change. It's just going to show the split of whose accounts for the AUL. So, to me,
and you're basically writing it.
Yeah,
Is
to
part
me,
of
it
it
really doesn't matter.
associated with the fact that police has more members as well?
Well, no. What's happened is the police used to have a lot more members, and now they have more members, but the ratio is become closer. And that could, under the methodology, if that switches, then the contributions would switch back automatically.
I'm of a mindset, just do it right now. Just get it done, get it over with.
There's really no substantive change other than a number on a piece of paper.
That's correct.
So I'm good with that too, for the
It's
sake
just whether
of
someone
not
uses that
getting
number.
out of here at 5 o'clock.
Sandy, to be a motion?
Well, I think this is wrapped into all the other board discussions here, so that you see that they've got the economic assumptions for price inflation, wage inflation, amortization discount, and the allocation issue. So I believe that's the discussion and action that Kyron's asking, is to accept their recommendations.
Yeah, and there's two pieces that you need to.
Wage inflation?
So the wage inflation, we said consider increasing. If you think you might be increasing the discount rate in a year, we are fine delaying that change, because increasing the wage inflation will increase your costs, increasing the discount rate will reduce your costs. It doesn't make sense to increase the contribution and then decrease it. So we would rather make those changes at the same time if you think they're both going to be made. And we are fine waiting another year to assess the wage inflation. But ultimately, we think the wage inflation is going to need to be changed.
I mean, I would say just make no changes. Goes to my question about, is it COVID and those things
Right.
kind of one-off. And I know it's an actuarial presentation because there was no mention of AI. So you could have brought it in terms of inflation and asset, returns, etc. Joke.
So I think our...
Chair, I have a...
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think I've gathered my thoughts, and I want to be very specific on what I'm objecting to. The main thing I object to is, and I've said this in the past, I think, but perhaps less articulately, is using the capital market expected rate of return assumption to determine what our liability should be discounted at. I think it's reasonable to assume the interest rate piece is obviously a significant impact. And the risk you run by sort of having this tautology is your return should be based on what our SAA is. And the SAA is based on how much risk we want to take. And that's an output. Whereas the liability assumption is an input. And I think that's what I object to. I'm not saying we should change it from 6.625 to something higher, but I do believe that using the expected return on assets is not the right way to think about it.
Are we using best practice?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree with Eshwar as far as no changes at this point in time. And a question from Maytech, since we had a kind of a two-part thing with the bookkeeping section and this, can that all be wrapped into one as far as?
It can be wrapped all into one, or we could check separate motions just for clarity of record. For example, it sounds like everyone has an agreement on price inflation. I mean, there's no proposed changes and there has been no discussion. So, you can take the ones piecemeal, right? Like if you put discount rate as its own motion, and then the allocation issue as well as its own motion.
Dave, I hear a motion.
Yeah, make the motion to accept Chiron's proposed changes and no wage inflation increase this year. And then we'll take the bookkeeping one separate, I think.
And that's just for the economic assumptions, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion.
Let's see.
I have a second. I have a motion by Dave, second by Eswar. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Do I have a second motion?
Second motion would be to accept Chiron's proposed changes for correctly separating police and fire tier 1 unfunded liability allocations. Did I get that right, Bill?
Immediately?
Yeah, I think we referred to
Immediately or
it as
staged?
the quick change.
Quick
option.
change.
We'll do the quick change option
Okay.
and immediately.
We have a motion from Dave.
Did discount rate get into the first? I'm sorry, I got misunderstood. I thought the
Discount
first one
rate
was
was in
only
the first
inflation.
Yes, because discount rate is one of the economic assumptions.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'd like to change my vote on that.
Okay. So
I
for the record,
misunderstood.
that's an opposed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Sorry, I want to change my vote to abstain because I don't believe I have enough information to make the decision on the 6.625. It's not an opposition, but it's an abstinence.
Got that?
Got it.
Okay, I have a motion on the UAL. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Sunita, motion by Dave. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Why don't we go ahead and take a break? We're at 12 o'clock, almost. to move on?
Anyway,
Yeah, no worries.
yeah.
Recording in progress.
Chair Franco, I got a comment to make, see if you consider this in the board. Every time I hear these actuary numbers, it can last a lifetime. I feel like I was negotiating again 30 years ago. But they never did ever bring any numbers about the mortality rate. We talk about unfunded liability that keeps on going up. I'm in chair of one like you guys. I don't see anybody working 30 years today. It's rare. And they're passing away faster than hell. Less than 15 years. And I've been watching lately. It's even getting worse. And so then their spouse or partners who only may be alive for 5 more years, a 50% reduction. I really would like to see if, and I'm not trying to make people do any more work, but I really believe that has an effect on something. I'd like to see those kind of actuary numbers, take a look at that. With your permission.
Bill's left, but if I remember from previous reports, and Andrew may remember, I do believe they use the CalPERS rate.
The CalPERS mortality?
Yeah, because we're such a small number compared to what CalPERS is. I believe that they kind of use theirs. But we can ask that of Bill.
Yeah, but I never heard the topic brought up at all.
Okay, moving to 4E. Discussion and action to approve the reallocation of the fiscal year 23-24 administrative budget to 1, increase professional services by $10,000, 2, increase medical services by $50,000, and 3, reduce non-personnel service and equipment by $60,000 with no effect on the total administrative budget. Maybe I can just ask John quickly, professional services and medical services, I'm assuming is related to either attorneys and the QMA, IME, or whatever we're using?
Yes, so my understanding is the budget policy requires us to bring this to the board because of the one item that's over 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
So with the board's approval, we're looking to shift some of the buckets around because of some of the investigations that happened during the previous year, as well as our number of medical examiner cases that we're being able to push through, a much higher number than expected. And so we had enough budget in the overall budget, but just not in the individual buckets.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
We got a motion from Dave, a second by Dick. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, moving on. So we have item number 4F. I believe staff is not fully prepared to have the conversation on this yet. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I was a little ambitious to put this on the schedule. I'm requesting that we table this to our next meeting.
Okay. Moving on to 4G, discussion and action to authorize the chair to amend agreement between board and Roberto Pena to include reimbursement of housing rental costs incidental to the new CEO transition with a total not to exceed a very specific amount of $5,003.92 for the term of the month. Just to explain, due to getting the JPC, the boards together, and all our processes to onboard John, there were some delays. Roberto's lease had expired. We had talked about putting him up in a hotel when he was in town. He was able to negotiate a small extension on his lease. I do believe, because of our slow to react, that we should be responsible for that payment. So this would authorize me to approve the reimbursement of those costs.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Dick,
Second.
second from Dave. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, moving on to 5, retirements. Cleotis D. Doss, Fire Captain, Fire Department, effective October 13, 2024, with 27.27 years of service. Sean D. Pierce, Police Sergeant, Police Department, effective October 25th, 2024, with 27.10 years of service. Tancio Garcia, Fire Engineer, Fire Department, effective October 13th, 2024, with 25.06 years of service with reciprocity. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Dick,
Second.
second by Dave. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Anything you guys want to say?
Best to him. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Sean. Perfect amount of time, 27.1 years. But I know he's going to continue working, but yeah, that's his choice.
And I just want to say, yeah, so congratulations to Dawson Garcia. Thank you for your service and enjoy your retirement.
Great, thank you. 5.2, defer vested. Jonathan Atkinson, Police Lieutenant, Police Department, effective October 12th, 2024, with 25.07 years of service with reciprocity. Michael McMahon, Police Officer, Police Department, effective November 23rd, 2024, with 29.26 years of service with reciprocity.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion, Dick.
Second.
Who's the second? Dave. Second, Dave. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I am pleased to announce that on item number 6, death and survivorship notifications, there are none.
Thank
So that
God.
is good to hear. So we'll move on to committee minutes, reports and recommendations. The Investment Committee.
We've not had a meeting since.
Okay. 7.2, audit risk.
No meeting since our last board meeting. We have an upcoming joint audit committee on October 31st.
Okay. Governance, that would be me. We had our last meeting in June. Next meeting is scheduled for December. Disability.
Yes, thank you for approving Salzman and Johnson to continue. And we have a meeting on November 15th and nothing in October. So you have the oral update, and of course, there's the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, and we will receive and file the minutes.
Franco, can I make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
One of the earlier items about the budget and shuffling the money. And one of the reasons shuffling is because the disability committees is going through the applications at a very quick pace. Just want to acknowledge that, I mean, the processes and the new hires that we've made in the last few years to speed up the process, it seems like it's really paying off, and we're servicing and helping our members getting through that backlog that we have. So thank you to the disability committee and staff for all your hard work.
Thank you, Andrew. Real quick, with Dave Wilson's help, of course, we're doing, our staff is fantastic, and the doctors and the reports are right on the money. Unfortunately, they're huge, but they help us make better decisions, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Yeah, Sandra, her staff, and Russ are just killing it, and Dick and I are happy to be able to get so many through and that have been backlogged for so long. So keep up the good work. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. JPC.
We've not had a meeting.
Okay. Proposed agenda items.
So one item, the IC had discussed some changes to the IPS. And Prabhu and I were supposed to talk last week, we couldn't, so subject to our conversation, we may bring it on the agenda for next month.
Well, I actually listened to the minutes, and it was supposed to go back, something limited was approved, but it was supposed to go back to the IC and not the board. So it should not be brought to the board. I'm very clear on that.
Let me just step in here. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. There's been a lot of talk amongst these IPS. I first want to be careful that there's not too many sidebar conversations, because it is something that has to be discussed in the appropriate venue. But I believe there's two things that I would like to see. I would like, as I've explained before, consultants, staff, and the investment committee to have a conversation. In order for that to happen, we're going to have to approve a budget, because it's going to be outside the retainer for the consultants. So what I would like is two things. One, for the IC to come back with a proposed budget for what this is going to cost. And secondly, to my knowledge, I know the IC itself reviews the policy probably every year or two, but I would be curious as to there's something in the policy that triggers a vetting process or a review. 5 years, critical, market change, governmental regulation, something to that extent, to be added to the policy.
So if I may, so the proposed agenda item here, we don't have it agendized for discussion and action or discussion even on the IPS right now. What we can do is just take note of this for a future agenda item. So I would please counsel the board and staff to refrain from discussing the topic until it's agendized.
Okay. So I'm not sure what the transcripts of the meeting say. I did talk to Maytag.
I do believe this is going beyond, because it's not agendized, we can't have a discussion on it.
Okay. But
We could discuss offline
we
to
can
figure out.
discuss offline.
Right.
Yeah. Let me hear the meetings. Yeah. I'll talk to Maytag.
So is there a proposed agenda item for the future then, for the next meeting?
Well, we've have for the proposed agenda items for the chair's consideration to have the issue that Eshwar raised. And
Yeah,
we've got,
discussion on the IPS.
right, and so it's to the chair's discretion and on how to agendize that when it's appropriate.
We have time for that. Our next agenda review is not for 3 weeks.
Right, so again, we don't have, the only item right now is agendized, proposed agenda item. We can't talk on the substance of any of it. But if there is a topic or an issue that you would like to address, Eshwar has raised one, and so that's appropriate for this proposed agenda item section. But no further discussion is warranted under the Brown Act, because under the Brown Act, so just so everyone's aware, is that we need to give the public notice of the topics that are going to be discussed 72 hours before the agenda is posted. By putting something on and discussing under the proposed agenda item without it fully being agendized does not give sufficient notice to the public and all stakeholders that this is being discussed. And so that's why I'm cautioning all the board to refrain from any substantive or further discussions on the topic until it's agendized at a future meeting.
Right. You're saying don't discuss it today, but it's a proposed agenda item for next
To be
month.
discussed next time.
Subject to the chair's discretion.
Yeah.
So noted. Okay, anything else? Meeting adjourned.
Sorry. Is that too enthusiastic?